The last time I saw her face, before everything changed, it was framed by the sterile white of a hospital pillow. Her expression was a complicated mask of pity and impatience. 10 years later, I saw that same face across a polished mahogany table in a legal conference room. The pity was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate greed. She thought she had me cornered again, that she could break what was left of me and take the rest. She had no idea that the man she left for dead in that hospital bed had spent a decade building a fortress she could never breach. She was about to find out that the foundation of that fortress was the very rubble she had left me in. My name is Mark. I am 42 years old now, but this story begins when I was 30. I was a furniture maker, not the kind that assembles flat-pack boxes, but a true craftsman. I worked with my hands, with oak and walnut and cherry, turning raw timber into pieces of functional art. My workshop was my sanctuary, filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish, the hum of the lathe my constant companion. I believed in the honesty of the work, in building things that would last for generations. I thought I was building a life with that same integrity, a life with Sarah. We had been married for 5 years. I adored her. To me, she was vibrant, exciting, a flash of color in my quiet, focused world. I loved the way she laughed, the way she would come into the workshop and run a hand over a finished piece, even if she didn't truly understand the hours that went into it. I saw her desire for nice things not as materialism, but as an appreciation for beauty, something we shared. I was working tirelessly, saving every spare dollar, to build us the house she'd always dreamed of, a place with big windows and a garden, a proper home for the family I hoped we would one day have. My hands were often calloused and stained, but they were building our future, or so I believed. The signs of her discontent were there, but I chose to interpret them as ambition for us as a couple. Her friends were marrying men in finance, in law, men who wore suits and drove German cars. Their weekends were filled with gallery openings and expensive dinners, while ours were often spent with me in the workshop, trying to finish a commission. Jessica's husband just made partner, she would say, her voice casual, but with an edge I failed to properly decipher. They're looking at a house in the Heights. I would just nod, smelling of wood glue and turpentine, and tell her, "We'll get there, honey. One beautiful, solid piece at a time." I thought she was proud of my craft. I didn't realize she was ashamed of my trade. She started talking about a man from her office, Richard. He was a senior VP, charismatic and wealthy. She talked about his boat, his condo downtown, the way he commanded a room. It was all framed as office gossip, stories about the boss. I listened, a bit detached, sanding down a tabletop, my focus on the grain. It never occurred to me that she was comparing my sawdust-covered reality to his polished corporate fantasy. I trusted her. That was my fundamental mistake. I trusted her completely. The inciting incident wasn't an argument or a confession. It was the screech of tires on wet asphalt and the sickening crunch of metal. A drunk driver ran a red light. I remember the sound more than the impact. A deep, resonant thud that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. Then, darkness. I woke up in the hospital. The world was a blur of white rooms, hushed voices, and a pain so profound it felt like a separate entity living inside me. My right leg was shattered in 3 places. My spine had 2 fractured vertebrae. The doctor, a kind man with tired eyes, spoke to me in gentle, measured tones. He used words like long recovery, uncertain prognosis, and permanent nerve damage. Sarah was there at first. She held my hand, her touch feeling distant and cool. Her eyes, however, told a different story. They weren't filled with the worry or love I expected. They were filled with a kind of weary appraisal, like a home buyer inspecting a property and discovering terminal foundation issues. She looked at the machines I was hooked up to, at the cast on my leg, at the brace they would soon fit around my torso, and I could see her calculating. She wasn't calculating my odds of recovery. She was calculating her losses. The second day, Richard visited. He stood at the foot of my bed in a tailored suit, looking deeply uncomfortable. He brought a bouquet of lilies, the funereal scent of which filled the small room. "Terrible business, Mark," he said, his voice smooth and insincere. Sarah's been a wreck. We're all hoping for the best for you. Sarah stood beside him, not beside me. She didn't meet my eyes. That was the moment a sliver of ice pierced through the fog of my pain medication. I saw it then. The way he looked at her, the way she subtly leaned toward him. It wasn't a friendly visit from a concerned boss. It was an inspection. They were surveying the wreckage. The betrayal itself was swift and clinical. A week later, while I was drifting in and out of a morphine-induced haze, a nurse came in with a manila envelope. "A courier dropped this off for you, Mr. Henson," she said brightly. Inside was a letter from a lawyer. It informed me that Sarah was filing for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. It also informed me that our joint savings account, the one containing every penny I had saved for our future house, had been emptied. The withdrawal had been made 2 days after my accident. She hadn't even waited a week. The pain from my injuries was a roaring fire, but this new pain was a shard of ice in my heart. It was cold, sharp, and absolute. I lay there, trapped in a broken body, in a sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and lilies, and understood that my life, the one I had been so carefully building, had just been demolished. She had taken the money, the future, and my trust, and left me with nothing but broken bones and hospital bills. In that moment of absolute desolation, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling, something inside me shifted. The roaring fire of physical pain and the icy shard of betrayal merged. They didn't break me. They forged something new. Cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to scream or cry or beg. I was going to get better. And then I was going to rebuild. The first phone call I made was not to her or to my family. It was to David. David and I had been friends since college. He was a quiet, methodical man who had become a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer specializing in business contracts. He was at my bedside within an hour. He read the lawyer's letter, his expression hardening with each line. He looked at the bank statement I'd had the nurse print for me showing the zero balance. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just sat down, looked me straight in the eye, and asked the most important question. "What do you want to do, Mark?" I thought for a long time, the beeping of the heart monitor a steady rhythm in the quiet room. I could fight her. I could drag this through the courts, try to prove malicious intent, try to claw back some of the money. But from where? I was flat on my back, facing months, maybe years of rehabilitation. I had no income. The workshop was shuttered. A legal battle would drain what little energy I had, energy I needed to learn how to walk again. "I'm going to let her have it," I said, my voice raspy. "The money, the car, the furniture in the apartment. All of it. I'm not going to fight." David raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? This is predatory, Mark. We could argue duress. She wants a quick, clean break so she can be with him." I reasoned, the logic coming with a surprising clarity. If I fight, it gets messy. It gives her a reason to stay engaged, to sling mud. If I sign, she's gone. She gets what she wants, and she leaves me alone. And right now, David, being left alone to heal is the only thing I have left to fight for. It was a strategic retreat. I was conceding the battle so I could survive the war. My war wasn't with her anymore. It was with my own body, with my own future. He nodded slowly, understanding. "Okay, we give her the uncontested divorce. We sign whatever she puts in front of us. We make her disappear from your life as quickly and quietly as possible." It was the most painful decision I had ever made, an admission of total defeat. But it was also the first step on my new path. I was cutting away the gangrenous limb to save the patient. I signed the papers a week later, my hand shaking as I scrawled my name. The nurse had to hold the clipboard for me. Sarah never came back to the hospital. The divorce was finalized before I took my first step with a walker. She was gone. I was alone. The long work began. The next 10 years were a testament to the slow, grinding power of methodical execution. The first year was pure hell. Physical therapy was a landscape of relentless pain. Every millimeter of movement was a victory paid for in sweat and agony. The therapists were kind but firm, pushing me past limits I didn't know I had. While my body was being rebuilt, my old life was dismantled. My workshop was sold to pay for the initial mountain of medical debt my insurance didn't cover. My tools, my beautiful specialized tools that felt like extensions of my own hands, were auctioned off for pennies on the dollar. I lost everything that had defined me. I was no longer a craftsman. I was a patient and invalid. I moved into a small, ground-floor apartment, the kind with gray carpets and thin walls. It was all I could afford on disability payments. The silence was the hardest part. The absence of the workshop's hum, the absence of Sarah's laughter. It was a hollow, empty space that echoed with my own failures. There were dark days when the pain was overwhelming and the future seemed like a long, gray road to nowhere. But that cold resolve forged in the hospital bed never left me. It was a pilot light burning in the darkness. The turning point came from my own frustration. The world, I quickly learned, is not designed for people with limited mobility. Chairs were too low, tables were the wrong height, and getting out of bed was a daily, strategic challenge. One day, after a particularly difficult morning, I sat at my cheap kitchen table, sketching on a napkin. I wasn't drawing furniture as art. I was drawing it as a solution. I designed a bed with a simple, integrated lift mechanism. I designed a chair with spring-loaded assistance. I designed a workbench that could be raised and lowered with a crank. My hands couldn't build them anymore, but my mind could still see them, still solve the problems. The craftsman was still alive inside me. I took my sketches to David. He had been a constant presence, visiting me weekly, bringing groceries, handling my paperwork. He looked at my drawings, his lawyer's mind immediately seeing past the rough sketches to the potential within. "There's a market for this, Mark," he said. His voice filled with a genuine excitement I hadn't heard in years. "A huge one. This isn't just furniture. This is medical equipment with dignity." That was the beginning of Phoenix Designs. The name was David's idea. Rising from the ashes. It felt appropriate. We started small. I did the designs, obsessing over every detail, every angle, every mechanism. David handled the business. He secured a small business loan, found a local machine shop to produce the prototypes, and filed the patents. Our first office was my tiny apartment living room. Our first sale was to a local retirement community. They ordered 6 of our assisted lift chairs. I remember holding that first check in my hands. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that I could still create, still build. The growth was slow at first, then exponential. My designs were good because they were born of experience. I understood the daily struggles of our customers because I lived them. We expanded from chairs to beds, to adjustable kitchen counters, to bathroom fixtures. We reinvested every dollar of profit back into the company, into research and development, into better materials and more efficient manufacturing. I designed a modular walker with integrated storage that became an industry standard. The patent for that alone was a game changer. Throughout these years, I lived simply. I still lived in a modest apartment, drove a sensible car. The limp and the cane were my constant companions, a physical reminder of where I had started. I poured all my energy, all my focus into the company. David and I became more than friends. We were partners in the truest sense. He built the corporate structure and I built the products that gave it life. Phoenix Designs grew from a 2-man operation in a cramped apartment to a 100-employee company with a state-of-the-art design and manufacturing facility. I was, on paper, a wealthy man, but I never felt it. My satisfaction came not from the bank balance, but from the emails we received from customers. An elderly woman who could now get out of bed on her own. A disabled veteran who could cook a meal for his family again. I was building things that mattered. I was restoring independence. It was a purpose far greater than crafting beautiful tables for wealthy clients. I never looked for Sarah. I never asked about her. As far as I was concerned, she existed in a different lifetime. I assumed she was living her glamorous life with Richard, in a big house in the Heights, and had forgotten all about the broken man she left behind. I was fine with that. Her memory was a scar, and like my physical scars, it had faded into a pale, numb line. It no longer hurt to the touch. Then, 10 years to the month after the accident, my receptionist buzzed my office. "Mr. Henson, there's a Sarah Collier here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's a personal matter." The name took a moment to register. She had taken Richard's last name. A cold stillness settled over me. After a decade of silence, the ghost had returned. "Send her in," I said, my voice even. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, one of my own designs, and waited. She walked in, and for a moment, I was struck by how much time had aged her. The vibrant spark I remembered was gone, replaced by a brittle hardness. Her clothes were expensive, but they looked worn, a little too tight. There were lines of stress around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. She looked around my spacious office, at the architectural models of our new product lines, at the awards on the wall, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and undisguised avarice. "Mark," she said, her voice attempting a warm familiarity that fell completely flat. "Wow, you've done well for yourself." "Sarah," I replied, my tone neutral. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" She launched into a practiced, self-pitying monologue. Her life with Richard hadn't been the fairy tale she'd imagined. His business had suffered a downturn. They had to sell the boat, then the condo. He had become moody, difficult. They had separated a few months ago. She was struggling, trying to get back on her feet. It was a story designed to elicit sympathy, to paint her as a victim of circumstance. I listened without expression, my hands resting on the smooth wood of my desk. "I heard you were doing okay," she continued, gesturing around the office. "But I had no idea it was this. I'm so proud of you, Mark. I always knew you had it in you." The lie was so blatant, so audacious, it was almost impressive. "Get to the point, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her demeanor shifted. The faux warmth vanished, replaced by a sharp edge of entitlement. "Well, it's just that. When we were together, we talked about starting a business. Your furniture business. This," she said, her gesture now an all-encompassing claim. "This is basically the same idea. It grew out of the work we started together. I feel I was a partner in that, in the beginning. I supported you. I encouraged you." I stared at her, my mind a placid lake of calm. The woman who had left me destitute in a hospital bed was now claiming to be my foundational business partner. The absurdity was breathtaking. "You were never my partner, Sarah," I stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. "You were my wife." "It's the same thing," she insisted, her voice rising. "I deserve a share. For my early contributions. For the years I gave you. I helped you build your dream. Now that it's a success, I should be a part of it." She named a number. It was an astronomical sum, enough to set her up for life in the luxury she so clearly craved. She thought she could waltz back in after a decade and lay claim to my life's work. A life I had built not just without her, but because of her. Her betrayal was the catalyst. The ashes she left me in were the soil from which all this had grown. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "I think you should leave now." Her face contorted with rage. "You can't just dismiss me. I know my rights. I'll get a lawyer, Mark. You owe me." "My lawyer's name is David Miller," I said calmly, pushing a business card across the desk. "Have your counsel contact him. Now, please leave." She snatched the card, shot me a look of pure venom, and stormed out of my office. The moment the door closed, I buzzed David. "She was here," I said. "It's starting." "I'm ready," he replied. "Let her make her move." Sarah's miscalculation was epic in its scope. She was blinded by her belief that I was still the same simple, trusting man she had married. She saw the success, but she couldn't comprehend the discipline, the pain, and the sheer force of will that had built it. She saw me as a winning lottery ticket she had foolishly discarded and was now entitled to reclaim. Her lawyer sent a letter of demand a week later, formalizing her ridiculous claim. She was alleging that Phoenix Designs was a continuation of the marital enterprise, and that she was due 50% of its current valuation. David and I met in the company boardroom, the same room where Sarah would eventually face her downfall. He laid out her lawyer's letter on the table. "This is amateur hour," David said with a dismissive wave. "It's a shakedown. They're hoping you'll pay a hefty settlement to make them go away quietly." "We're not settling," I said. "We're not giving her a single dollar. She didn't steal from me the first time." "Good," David smiled, "because I've been waiting 10 years for this. We're going to let her file the lawsuit. We're going to let her spend money on legal fees. We're going to let her build her fantasy case in the clouds. And then, at the deposition, we are going to burn it to the ground." In the weeks that followed, Sarah's desperation became more apparent. We learned through David's channels that Richard's financial situation was far worse than she had let on. He wasn't just in a downturn. He was being investigated for fraud. His assets were frozen. He had cut her off completely, leaving her with nothing. Her support system was gone. The man for whom she had thrown her life away had proven to be as hollow as her own values. She tried to contact me again, this time leaving tearful voicemails. She apologized. She said she had made a terrible mistake. She talked about the good times, the life we could have had. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt at emotional manipulation. I never returned her calls. I forwarded the voicemails to David, who added them to our growing file. Each desperate plea was another nail in her legal coffin. The day of the deposition arrived. It was held in a neutral conference room at a large law firm downtown. The air was thick with tension. Sarah sat on one side of the long mahogany table with her lawyer, a slick-looking man who exuded an unearned confidence. I sat on the other side with David. Sarah refused to look at me, staring straight ahead with a look of defiant victimhood. Her lawyer began laying out their case. He painted a picture of Sarah as the supportive, driving force behind my early creative ambitions. He spoke of her emotional investment and strategic insights into my fledgling woodworking business. He produced old photos of us, smiling, as if they were evidence of a business partnership. It was a complete work of fiction. When it was David's turn, he didn't begin with a rebuttal. He began with a simple document. He placed a copy in front of Sarah and her lawyer. "This is the final divorce decree, signed by your client 10 years ago," he said, his voice calm and lethal. "I'd like to draw your attention to paragraph 7, subsection B. It's a standard mutual waiver of all future claims on assets or income acquired by either party post-dissolution. Your client signed this, legally and without duress, thereby extinguishing any claim she could ever have on Mr. Henson's future earnings. This entire lawsuit is predicated on a claim she legally signed away a decade ago." Sarah's lawyer's face paled slightly. He clearly hadn't expected us to be so prepared. "That was for the small furniture business," he stammered. "Phoenix Designs is a different entity, a medical technology company. An entity founded 2 years after the divorce was finalized," David countered smoothly. "Founded with zero marital assets, I might add." He then produced another document. It was the bank statement from our old joint account, showing the date of her withdrawal and the zero balance. In fact, the only marital asset your client took was the entirety of their liquid savings, which she withdrew while my client was incapacitated in a hospital bed. She didn't invest in his future. She liquidated his past. Sarah flinched as if struck. Her lawyer looked at her, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. This was not the story she had told him. David wasn't finished. "You've made the claim that Phoenix Designs is worth a substantial amount and that your client is entitled to half. Let's talk about valuation," he signaled to an associate, who brought in a thick, bound portfolio and placed it on the table. "This is the certified valuation of Phoenix Designs, prepared for our annual shareholder meeting. As you can see, the company is valued at $94 million. A collective gasp went through the room. Sarah's jaw literally dropped. Her lawyer's eyes bulged. They had been suing me for a percentage of what they assumed was a small, successful company worth a few million at most. They had no concept of the scale. They had been trying to pick the pocket of a giant. "94 million, David repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "And Mr. Henson is the majority shareholder, holding 60% of the stock. He is also the chief designer and holds 7 key patents in his own name, including the patent for the Phoenix lift mechanism, which has been licensed to 3 other major manufacturers. His success has absolutely nothing to do with the man who made wooden tables 10 years ago, and it has even less to do with your client, who abandoned that man. The room was silent. Sarah stared at the portfolio, her face a mask of disbelief, rage, and a dawning, horrifying understanding. She wasn't just looking at a number. She was looking at the ghost of the life she could have had, the life she had thrown away for a fraud in a fancy suit. The man she had deemed worthless, disposable, had built an empire from the rubble she had left him in. David delivered the final blow. Given that your client's case is legally baseless and filed in bad faith, we will be countersuing. We will seek full reimbursement for all our legal fees, as well as punitive damages for malicious prosecution. Your frivolous claim is about to become a very real and very expensive liability for you, Ms. Collier. That's when she finally broke. The facade of the wronged woman crumbled, and the raw, greedy, desperate person underneath was exposed. A choked sob escaped her lips. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, it's not fair." She turned to me, her eyes wild with a terrifying cocktail of emotions. "You did this to spite me," she hissed, tears streaming down her face. "You built all of this just to make me feel worthless." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time that day. I felt no anger, no hatred. I felt nothing at all but a distant, clinical pity. She couldn't comprehend that my life's work had nothing to do with her. She was so narcissistic that she believed my 10 years of pain, struggle, and creation were all just an elaborate act of revenge aimed at her. She was, and always had been, a footnote in my real story. I stood up slowly, my leg aching from sitting so long. I picked up my cane, its polished walnut head, carved by my own hands, fitting comfortably in my palm. I looked directly at her. "I didn't build this to spite you, Sarah," I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent room. "I built it because you broke my leg, not my hands. And not my mind." I turned and walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. David followed me out, closing the door on the sound of her complete and utter collapse. We walked down the hallway, the rhythmic tap of my cane on the marble floor the only sound. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. The final chain to my past had been broken. I didn't go back to the office. I drove to my workshop, the real one, the private one I had built for myself adjacent to the main factory. It was my sanctuary, just like the old one had been, but bigger, better equipped. It still smelled of sawdust and varnish. I ran my hand over a large block of cherry wood, its surface smooth and cool. The ghosts were finally gone. The pain, the betrayal, the memory of her. All of it had been purged in that conference room. I picked up a chisel and mallet. I began to work not on a product, not on a design for the company, but on something for myself. The chips of wood fell away, and a new shape began to emerge. I wasn't just carving wood. I was shaping my future, a future I had built with my own 2 hands, on a foundation of my own making. They had tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. The crash had broken my body, but it had forged my will. And I had learned that the strongest structures are not built on dreams of what might be, but on the solid, unshakable ground of who you are. And I knew exactly who I was. I was a builder, and I was just getting started.